A common theme on YouTube is when you see Muslims jump on the anti-colonialism bandwagon. But what's even more funny is when you see what their history actually is, especially when it comes to the issue of Israel. Inside New Zealand we have a term which is adopted by the indigenous population which is called tangata whenua, which is self-determination. And that is expanded in the UN Charters in regards to indigenous peoples and their right for self-determination. Their ability for land to be returned, or at least have compensation for the land which have had confiscated by their colonial masters, those who had colonised their land and subjugated them to second-class citizenship. I find it funny, therefore, that when I hear Muslims talk about their sympathies and their solidarity with those who have been colonised by Western powers, to suddenly have a double standard when it comes to Jews, when it comes to Israel. Only a casual glance at the historical information regarding the Jews inside the Palestinian area, what is historically known as Israel, would tell you that the Jews are the tangata whenua of that particular land. That even a casual glance at the history will tell you that they historically have always been there. There is historical evidence, not religious. The religious by itself means nothing when it comes to any declaration of sovereignty over a given area of land. In the case of the Jews, they've consistently been there for several thousand years, and there is archaeological historical evidence to prove that up, to prove such a claim. People look at the Bible and claim that it was conquered. It was never conquered. What you see inside the Bible is actually a set of narratives whereby one type of society is replaced with another society. When one looks at the understanding of the early so-called Jewish society, or the prior to the Jewish society, you will find that the Jews, which are now, were actually originally part of this society that exists. Through these narratives of battles and conquering, it is a narrative to say that a new order has been re-established. A new order is established in that particular land. So it was a matter of one type of order replacing another type of order, rather than one sort of people conquering that land and wiping out one race in favour of another race. That information can be found pretty much any place you want. Documentary channel, history channel. You can look through the Jewish archives. You can look through just secular archives if you want. The information there is open. What I find interesting is that in this process of anti-colonialism zeal by Muslims, they completely ignore their own colonialist drive. Within a space of 300 years, they almost had dominated all of the Middle East and had one of the largest empires in existence, Islam, in terms of the Islamic empire. So I find it funny that that they completely ignore and yet keep on revering the so-called golden age of Islam, and yet ignoring the colonialisation efforts and the eventual subjugation and wiping out of other religions, other cultures, races and so forth within this tidal wave of Islam that came across the Middle East, where you found formerly Christian and Jewish nations suddenly subjugated to Islam. This sudden conversion of all these people in the lands to Islam didn't happen to be simply an accident of one religion finding another religion and the people in that particular area noticing that the invading religion was somehow of a superior quality. And many times you actually find that there was an active discrimination policy which included singling out Jews, that they could not do certain things, that they had to wear certain articles of clothing to actually denote the fact that they are Jewish. There were also restrictions in terms of how Christians could practice their religion, from the fact that they could not apostatise, they could not tell people about Christianity, to punitive restrictions such as how high a steeple bell tower is. Now, what relation does that have today? Well, what I find today, like I've said, is that there is a zeal of anti-colonialism by Muslims on YouTube and around the world, and yet they ignore their own colonial past and they look at all the historical evidence regarding Israel. I also find it funny that they talk about the restrictions that are placed upon them within the case of the Switzerland minaret referendum, and yet they ignore the exact type of punitive restrictions that they place against non-Muslims in Muslim lands. And the constant catch cry they claim is, well, if you don't like it, you can always leave. Well, we could say the same thing about Muslims who come to the West. If you don't like it, you can always leave. I find this double standard, this hypocritical stance to be mildly amusing, because what we see is a perfect example of a people trying to wrap themselves in the shroud of anti-colonialism and the shroud of rights and the shroud of freedom, and yet when it comes to their own backyard, they seem to be more than happy to do discriminatory policies that even the most worst colonial powers never did in their wildest imaginations. I'll let you guys think about that.